This is the Convene podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Convene Talk, where we discuss interesting stories that appear in our popular newsletter, News Junkie. My name is Magdalena Tanasova, Digital Media Editor at Convene. Barbara, how about you tell our listeners a bit more about the research that we are going to discuss today?
I will. Thanks, Maggie. I'm Barbara Palmer, Convene's Deputy Editor. And today we're going to be looking at a report called the Future 100. And this annually compiles 100 emerging trends in 10 categories. And they include things like culture, technology, travel, marketing, innovation, all the good stuff. And until this year, the report has been released by Wunderman Thompson, a global marketing and communications firm. But Wunderman Thompson has now merged with another creative agency to form VML. So this was released by VML Intelligence. And the report is always illuminating, but this year it strikes me as being particularly valuable because it's based so much more on data. VML conducted surveys with 9,000 people in 9 countries around the world. And they also consulted with about 20 experts from academic, editors, heads of fashion houses, creative agencies. And I saw that one of them, at least, had a background in immersive events. And the report is just much more transparent this year about where the trends come from, which may be a trend in and of itself. But for the past few years, Convene has taken these trends and applied them to the events industry. I haven't dug deeply into all 256 pages of this report, but I did get the sense that the increasing profile of events could be felt in this trends report. There was a lot more about person-to-person experiences, and there were some mentions of events. And at the very least, the overarching trends are ones that are not only very familiar to our industry, but some of them we've been leaders in talking about their importance. And I'm just going to read a couple of lines from the foreword. It said, community and connection at scale are essential to 2024. And, I just think that that's a pretty good description of events, community and connection at scale. And the other big trend the report noted was an intentional slowing down against the hype cycle, kind of a rebellion against it. And I think that although event strategists might be personally busier than ever, we can see this intentional slowing down emerging at events, building more white space in, an emphasis on quality over quantity, taking time to talk and reflect about what's going on at the event. And I did want to just share a few data points from the survey. 91% of respondents wanted to feel more emotion in their lives. This question was specific to China, the UK, and the US. 70% preferred to spend money on experiences rather than things. And 79% of people said the role of brands has changed. 40% of those said that the role of brands are to make the world a better place. So I'm going to stop there. But Jen, I know that you were interested in the data about emotion and experience. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, this is Jen Dienst, Senior Editor, by the way. I think this was the first trend out of all the trends that caught my eye, mostly because it was the first trend listed, but also just because I felt like immediately I saw that and I thought of so many examples and I've read about so many instances where this is emotions are playing a bigger and bigger role in experiences and events. So according to this report, 2/3 of people globally say that they want brands to help them feel intense emotions. And this is according to VML Intelligence's own 2023 study. And it said at a time when people feel burned out, disconnected, and jaded, 77% say they just, quote, they just want to feel something to feel alive, end quote. I think that's just a big flag to event planners, something that they should pay close attention to. And what struck me is I immediately thought of a local example here in Charleston, South Carolina, where events are a huge part of our tourism infrastructure. Mostly leisure facing. These are, food and wine festivals, arts festivals like Spoleto. We actually have something called the Southeastern Wildlife Expo kicking off this weekend, which is really fun and interesting if you enjoy wildlife. But it's a huge, huge portion of our ecosystem, tourism ecosystem. And something interesting that I saw from someone who's a veteran of that industry, she's the former executive director of the Charleston Wine and Food Festival, which I believe is now one of the top, I think like top 10 largest festivals of its kind in the United States. She was there and led that festival for a very long time. She's actually gone out on her own and started producing a completely new type of event. And I haven't gone, but she kicked it off last week and I read about it. And it's something called a drop-in. And she said, I'm reading from an article from a local website called Holy City Center, but she said that we're purposely kicking things off with the inauguration of our Happier Hour series, which is, she calls, joyful in-person events rooted in movement and music that offer opportunities for mindfulness and attention in the midst of life's many obstacles. And she held this, in January with some songwriters, some performance experts. Sounded really cool and interesting. And I just thought that was such a kind of an interesting departure for someone in the event industry to kind of kick off a new type of event series, kind of rooted in that. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting. It really does sound like connecting with our emotions is going to play a bigger and bigger role in events in general, regardless of what the event is for, just from reading this report and reading examples like this.
I'm going to pick up from that, Jen. This is Michelle Russell, editor-in-chief. My choice was impactainment. I love made-up compound words. I think it's sort of a takeoff on edutainment, which is sort of become part of the vernacular. It's called Emotional Storytelling Inspires Positive Change. And the example they give is definitely one that I think is closely connected. And where I think this intersects with the business events industry is it's about one of the things that I think events try to do is make the destinations where they meet better for being there. So it is about community service projects. So this is about how impactainment is strongly rooted in behavioral science and psychology and involves creating impactful experiences that inspire mass action and change. It differs from edutainment in that it isn't just about educating participants, but also about galvanizing them to make a difference. So the example that was given was an immersive ocean positive dining experience with the Bahamas. I assume it was the tourism part of the tourism organization in the Bahamas. The event merged art exhibitions, multi-sensory dining, and 360-degree photography to highlight the conservational successes of the islands while educating guests about the beauty and the plight of the oceans. At the end of the experience, guests were invited to sign up for a beach cleanup, creating what the organizers called Hidden Worlds Entertainment calls a direct impact. So I think it is an example of a way to get more engagement at a community giving back kind of activity at events is to really emotionally engage people. I know Hospitality Helping Hands is something Pcma has done at Convening Leaders for years and years. And people always talk about the connections they make when they roll up their sleeves and they work alongside people they may never have met before, and also how they are able to contribute to an organization in the host destination and feel like they have made a difference. So it's always about the story behind it. Kurt, I'm going to jump over to you. I think you're going to talk about an impact in a digital environment as opposed to a physical environment.
Yes, but both, actually. This is Kurt Wagner. I'm the digital editor. And I chose the trend that they've called imagination stores, which is digital retail spaces that are created with the help of generative AI. And what I thought was interesting about this was sort of in an overall sense was that this sort of shows how generative AI, since I can't say that, I'm just going to say AI from now on, how it can be like a creative partner for people who are already creative. In this case, this trend is about how different retail stores have been creating online spaces, like virtual stores for their brands. Like Ralph Lauren did one last year, and it's still there, that has made this really cool, like super fancy store in the desert. And at every window, when you're walking through it, it's almost like one of those real estate house hunter things where you click on a button and it moves you closer, and you can click on like really fancy products that they sell, but you can also, you see out the windows and stuff, these great desert views and everything, and the building's really cool. So that was one example they gave. They also talked about this digital artist who has created futuristic Nike concept stores. One of them was on Mars and one on Mount Everest, and they're virtual stores. And those, sort of the same idea. Those probably look cooler because I think it was mostly photos, or that's all I could find of it. So I don't know what was inside. But this is something the events industry has been doing basically since the pandemic, because they had to find a way of making virtual meetings more interesting for participants who were tired of doing Zoom meetings all the time and just seeing a bunch of faces in their Zoom screens. And we've written a ton of stuff about that. I mean, there are tons of examples, and I won't go through those. But Maggie, our digital media editor, also did a thing last summer for the July-August 2023 issue where she played around with the AI tool Midjourney. And she did these prompts for Midjourney to create different kinds of event spaces. And what I thought was cool here was that she really sort of went for it, and they're sort of out there, a kind of out there spaces that I thought were really creative and really cool. And as this story talks about, with AI, people can sort of imagine these spaces, and maybe that will inspire architects to actually figure out new ways of creating spaces like this. Some seem more impossible than others, but I just feel like with AI, things are a little less impossible or science fiction-like than they used to be. And the possibilities are more there, both in the virtual world and in in-person spaces. Because imagine somebody taking these ideas or taking generative AI and saying, okay, I got to figure out a way to make my expo booths or my sponsor activation areas at in-person events more attractive to people and more interesting. And there's just, the possibilities kind of seem endless, I suppose, as long as you have money to do it. And then I think that even virtual meeting spaces will improve as the technology improves. That was sort of my take on that. And the in-person part of that sort of segues to what Casey talked about, which was people sort of stepping away from technology for a little while.
Yes. Thanks, Kurt. This is Casey Gale, managing editor, and my trend is, as Kurt said, going in sort of the opposite direction of what he just spoke about. VML is calling it Luddite mode, which is referencing, of course, the anti-technology movement of the 19th century. But more recently, it's about how Gen Z is seamlessly switching between moments of connectivity and digital withdrawal. There's actually a club called the Luddite Club based in New York, which is a teenage lifestyle group. And they've attracted a lot of attention in recent years because of their promotion of self-liberation from social media and technology, which is perhaps the opposite of what many would think young people want. But it's actually a very strong trend. VML cites Voxburner's Youth Trends report, which found that more than half of 16 to 24-year-olds worry about spending too much time on social media. So instead of completely rejecting technology, they're just trying to find balance. And that means they switch between moments where they want full connectivity on their phones and computers, and then crossing into Luddite mode when they need focus or calm for schoolwork or professional work. And this really reminded me of how many events we've written about that really try to inject moments of calm, inject moments of face-to-face connectivity between sessions to make sure people aren't constantly overstimulated, and how important it is to allow people time to make organic connections with each other. It also reminded me of how many newly constructed and renovated convention centers and hotels are leveraging nature's benefits, which is something that Barbara wrote about a couple years ago in Meetings in Your Brain. We're seeing a lot more greenery and living walls and nature, wood and stone and natural light incorporated into these spaces, which I think really just drives home how people want to disconnect and enjoy the environment around them. And that even though events might be very busy and there's a lot going on, it's really important to allow people to disconnect and find those moments that feel organic and real. And I think that segues into what Maggie wants to discuss.
Absolutely. I was about to say that's what I had in mind with the trend that I picked, which was called Well Ambition. And I love that because in the survey that VML did, they say that 73% of respondents say that work comes second to the rest of their life, and 76% claim they would not accept a job that was highly stressful. So when I read that, immediately a light bulb went on, and I was thinking, oh my God, so who is coming to work for events? Because we're known for the stress. And yes, there are people that are attracted to such type of stress, and the adrenaline that the position in events actually can bring to you, but it's not for everybody. And then the examples that they gave were interesting. Of course, they gave, as an example, the resignation of the New Zealand's Premier, Jacinda Ardern, which I believe many young women look up to. And when she said, I don't have enough in the tank to do the role justice, many said, I understand what you mean. And then they also quoted the musician Drake or actor Tom Holland, who just hit a pause on their careers. And these people are currently the role models for the next generation. So connecting this with events, it means that companies have to do a lot more to actually give employees a break. There were examples like early sabbaticals, dubbed burnout breaks, that some companies are doing. After 5 years, they just give you a leave that is usually paid and they don't ask you any questions. So if you want to take this break, you're free to do so. And this is usually done by big companies like Meta and Adobe. So I have never heard of a company in the events industry doing that. And maybe we should start seeing such breaks allowed in our industry as well, having in mind how many people have burnt out. And I'm sure just talking with people in the industry, we've all heard of stories of why I don't see this person anymore at events. And the reason is because they burned out and they had to leave the industry for good. So that's not a very good visual for our industry, or it's not very inspiring for the next generation. And we also heard that at Convening EMEA, one of the sessions, we had Gen Z on the panel who said the industry is just not sexy for the next generation. He was very, very honest. And I believe more people in the industry should hear that and think a bit more about it. So the hustle and grind is no longer aspirational, the report says, as people are seeking healthier balance. And I think I should just leave it at that. And we are all going to write a bit more about these trends. So look out for some more of our thoughts on this VML report, which is very, very interesting. And of course, in the show notes, you'll find a link to the actual report if you want to have a look for yourself. And to the team, thank you for the discussion. And of course, to everyone listening, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and until next time.